Well, this evening we're going to do the Timaeus in a different way, because I think I want to talk first about the fact that except for specialists, very few people get into the Timaeus, because the Timaeus is a cosmology. And a cosmology is a theory about how the universe was generated. Well, when you consider that we're talking about 4th century BC or 5th century BC physics, trying to explain how the universe was generated, you can certainly see why moderns would prefer to go into science and modern science to try to explain how the universe was generated, since obviously we have a greater scope of knowledge in terms of physics and chemistry and all the other sciences that can give an account of how the universe was generated. It's one of the major concerns of physicists and theoretical physicists today. So therefore, the idea of Plato's Timaeus is for the most part ignored. Now there's also in the Timaeus some metaphysics. So there's also metaphysics in it. And if you have a universe that's being generated, and the generation is based upon certain metaphysical principles, obviously it's not going to have too much currency in today's world. We don't think that way. Well, behind the cosmology is also a theology. That is to say, there's a God in the Timaeus that in fact brings about the cosmology or the universe. And equally well, the kind of God depicted in the Timaeus, while it has certain interesting aspects, there are many people today that aren't too concerned with theology either. Therefore, for a good number of reasons, it can be ignored or forgotten. So why should we now return to this? Well, let me propose a curious thing. What if Plato is only secondarily interested in how the universe was generated? And what he's really interested in, why it was generated. Not how, but why. Suppose further that his goal is not just the generation of the universe, but suppose his goal is to explain how man can be in a universe in which he can know himself and the universe. And in knowing both, and isolating the factors that brought that knowing and made that knowing possible, he can then develop a certain set of principles which can be used not only to explain how he can know himself and the universe, but how the set of principles can be said to be the primary principles for creation itself, or the cosmology. Now do it again. Suppose Plato is not just exploring how the universe was generated, but why. And suppose in that why, what he really seeks to explain is how it is that man can be in a universe in which he knows himself and can know himself and the universe, and in knowing that, recognize there are a certain set of principles, prior principles, which can be used as a set of principles that can explain how metaphysically the universe can be created. Not physically, but metaphysically how the universe can be created. Therefore, it's an entirely different kind of cosmology I'm now going to explore. What is it? We're not going to be talking about how the physical universe came into existence. That's only secondary. What we want to see is that set of principles which, once recognized, can be used to explain, right, the conditions necessary for the universe to come into existence. The conditions, not the causes. The conditions for the universe being generated at all. Now, when you try to explain the conditions for something, you're getting behind the causes. Because the cause of a fire, or lighting a match, or the flame igniting, is different than the conditions for that fire being ignited, right? You have to have oxygen, you have to have a supply of fuel, and et cetera, right? So the condition's always prior to the cause. Let's go further. Suppose we decide then that these conditions, explaining these conditions for the universe from a set of principles, can be understood as the first principles in a metaphysics. Well, if that's the case, then you're going to have a metaphysics that's going to rest on a set of principles which are going to be the conditions for explaining how the universe was generated. But more importantly, it's going to be the same set of principles going to explain how it is you're in a universe where you can know yourself as well as the universe. We could really do this in another way. You see, we could take the Timaeus in front of us and we could take a scissors and cut out everything in the Timaeus that deals with how the physical universe is generated. Just cut it out. Then we'd have two piles. We'd have a stack of material dealing with the physical generation of the universe and something else. That something else happens to be those set of principles which are metaphysical, which can account for how man can know himself in the universe. That's what we would have. Now, thank goodness, someone has already done this. And therefore, we don't have to start by inventing the metaphysical wheel. Now, Proclus did a commentary on Plato's Timaeus. And let me say something about it first. For many years, it was very difficult to get